What is happening, everyone? I hope all is well on this very, very fine day. Welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been here before, please hit the subscribe button, hit a like on the video. If you want to, you can wait until the end, see if you actually enjoy it. That's also fine by me. Today we have another heavily requested video. We're going to be going through my top 10 favourite films of all time in detail. I actually went through my list recently, chopped and changed quite a lot of it, so there might be some new films in here you haven't seen from me before, or you might have seen but not in my top 10. I went through my top 50. It's very hard to choose a top 10 out of the top 50, I'll be honest, because I love them all, and after seeing over 2,000 films, there's a lot of films that I love. I've been watching for a long time. I've dedicated thousands of hours towards it, so it is a case where choosing 10 is hard. But these films all have meaning to me, whether they brought me up in times where I was down, whether they brought me higher in times when I was up, doesn't matter. These films will have meaning, which we will go through in detail. We're going to go through all 10 from 10 to 1. This list could change, realistically. It depends on what day. I've done some rewatches recently. This is how it stands right now, the top 10 out of the, I believe, around 2,050 films I've seen so far. But again, some of the orders could change, but I'm just gone with it. I've gone with my head. This is kind of what we're working with. So without further ado, let's get into my top 10 films of all time, and we're going to be starting at number 10. My 10th favourite film of all time is Ingmar Bergman's Persona. It was actually the first Ingmar Bergman film I ever watched, and not to mention the first I ever watched, but probably the most important because it introduced me to one of my favourite filmmakers of all time. Absolutely adore this film. I think not only did it show me how creative and transcendent Bergman's style was in terms of how it transcended the medium, and you could see the influence that Bergman has, it also introduced me to one of my favourite actresses in Liv Ullmann. Bibi Andersson is also incredible in this as well. Not to mention that the performances are perfect, but going into the actual story and the details of it, I absolutely love how this is portrayed. Not only is it a film that warrants an extra viewing, but also one that requires it. I think on my first week I watched this, probably 6 months to a year ago, I'm not sure when it was. I actually rewatched it 3 times in a week because I wanted to know more, and I came out with it knowing probably everything by now, I would hope anyway. But I think this is a film that requires a lot of viewings. But more than that, it introduced me to this whole new world of Bergman's style, you know, these close-up facial expression shots, the ability to really, truly show emotion using Sven Nykvist, I think his name is, who is obviously the cinematographer who Bergman collaborates with or did collaborate with on a regular basis. And I think he's easily one of the best men behind a camera I've ever seen, and you can see that in, you know, Persona, you can see that in Autumn Sonata, Through a Glass Darkly, Cries and Whispers, but Persona comes out on top because it's the most important to me, because it's the one that introduced me to his work and the one which I first fell in love with. And even today, after watching maybe 12, 13 of his films so far, obviously I'm nowhere near finishing off his filmography yet, it still stands out as the best in my eyes. The hypnotic approach of utilizing two of the same person, but completely different characters in the way they're presented, and how one wants to get out of life and enter a new one, and one is presented with that life. Obviously, I won't go into spoilers right now because I think it's a film that you have to kind of watch and perceive what you're, you know, see what you perceive to be the outcome, the interpretation. But I think it's just a film which evoked so many emotions in me I didn't know were possible through the medium of filmmaking. I think that's the most powerful thing that Bergman has, is how his films, the facial expressions, the composition can evoke this emotion. And also the use of space in this is just incredible. It's a film I can sit back and watch over and over again, like many Bergmans now, which is a little bit weird to say considering the fact they are all pretty hard watches. You're not going to find an easy Bergman, and even Bergman's easier films are still pretty hard watches. They all deal with very deep topics in regards to, you know, sexuality, religion, finding oneself, generations, everything and more. And he fits so much in abundance in terms of his subtext that makes so many viewings warranted and probably required for the most part. You probably won't get it on the first go, but after a few goes round, you might love it. Same as me. But I think, without further ado, let's move on to number 9. Number 9 is actually going to be the Shane Meadows film, This Is England. I love the series, as well, the 3 limited series that came out after this as well, but the film is really just a massive part of my childhood and a massive part of my education growing up as well. I was shown this at an early age by my dad, who's one of his favourite films, probably earlier than I maybe should have been shown it, in all honesty. But I think it's just it's one of the best pieces and most powerful pieces of cinema to ever come out of the UK in my eyes. Shane Meadows just worked an absolute wonder with this. It's a a powerful indictment of racism and fascist ideologies and Thatcher's Britain at the times in terms of how society was shown. And it's probably one of the best films I've seen using a neo-realistic approach, one we've seen from I believe came from the old, Italian cinema. So, for example, you're looking at Bicycle Thieves as a primary example that comes to my head straight away. One of the best films I've seen use this neo-realistic approach. I think it's beautiful in the way that it shows society. It's a beautiful coming-of-age story, layered in political subtext of Thatcher's Britain and what people had to deal with in society at the time. Not only people who lived there, but also racial minorities as well. And I think not only is the ending so incredibly powerful and brutal and devastating and makes me cry every single time, but it's a very important life lesson. It'll still, a life lesson which is still relevant now, and it will always be relevant as these issues still occur on a day-to-day basis. But one where, especially if for an American or someone who's not from the UK, it probably won't maybe hit the same, but knowing the policies of Thatcher's Britain, the ideologies that went around at the time, and of the movements and where they were headed in terms of skinheads and stuff like that, I think it's a perfect representation of that. And of course, from what I've heard as well, my mum and dad grew up with the same music. The soul music in this is fantastic. It's one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard in cinema, and I think it's just a beautiful film, start from finish. It also features some of my favourite performances. I think Stephen Graham's performance in this is one of the best I've ever seen, and I've seen over 2,000 films, and I think it's scarily realistic how well he's able to portray Combo, and I can't really look at him past Combo now, or at least I couldn't for a few years. And from this film, he's actually come to be one of my favourite actors ever, purely for this film. And I think it's just a powerful, emotional watch which stays relevant. An indictment of racism and fascism, and I love it. I always will. Without further ado, let's move on to my number 8. My 8th favourite film of all time is actually the Coen brothers film No Country for Old Men, a film that again got handed to me at an early age, maybe earlier than it should have been. I first watched this in my probably early teens, I'm going to say, and it completely blew me away then. It still does now. It's one of my mum's favourite films from her favourite directors with the Coen brothers, and immediately when I started watching films, I was given, DVDs of Oh Brother Art Thou, No Country for Old Men, and Fargo, and amongst many others, The Big Lebowski, for example. But No Country for Old Men is always the one that stood out, and I actually laud this as being not only a film that got me into cinema, but the film to get me into cinema to begin with. The film that had such an impact on me from an early age. I think it's thrilling. I think it's suspenseful. Anton Chigurh gives one of my favourite ever performances. I think it has some of the most iconic scenes ever. The coin toss scene is a pure, brutal depiction of morality and the choices we make and what outcomes that those choices can have on others. So the coin toss scene, the motel sequence, the car chase sequence, the ending, which I love. I know a lot of people don't love the ending, but I think the beautiful thing about the ending is it's open to you. You can interpret whatever you want from the film. Did Anton Chigurh make it away with the money with his, with him all battered and bruised, whatever? Who killed Llewellyn? And it just goes so far. And I think not only is it so strong, but it's so well versed in its performances. Anton Chigurh, Javier Bardem, Tommy Lee Jones, Josh Brolin. It's just an impeccable film that utilizes in suspense in a way that is thrilling but also hypnotic in a way. And it will never leave me. The sequences will never leave me. And not only do I watch it now and get completely thrilled, but I just love it, and it will always bring me good memories, because it's not only a film which I love in terms of a technical approach, in terms of how the narrative presents itself. I have Llewellyn's outline tattooed on me, but it's also a film which reminds me of how I came to love film in the first place. So for that reason, it means a lot. Let's move on to my number 7. In at 7th place, maybe lower than a few of you thought, but I know a lot of you would have definitely predicted it would be in this top 10. And we've got Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, one of the first horrors I fell in love with, along with another one on this list, which you will see. And of course, a film from my all-time favourite director in regards to, Stanley Kubrick, who I believe this might have been the first film I actually watched directed by him as well. So again, it holds a regard similar to Persona, where it's like, this is the film to get me into Kubrick's filmography to begin with. But just an incredible, perfect portrayal of isolation, what that can do to the mind, obsession, abuse, demonization, and also just a complete depraved man and the ability Jack Nicholson had to portray a psychopath really is just unrivaled. It's one of my favourite ever performances. The use that Kubrick has to show, again, looking back at Bergman, there's clearly some influence in Kubrick's films from Bergman himself, is the use of these facial expressions, the use of the wit, the comedic-like style, which is similar to a director I regard, for example, Bong Joon-ho, is able to put little witty bits of humour into his serious films and serious projects. But I think Stanley Kubrick's film, it's one of the best films on abuse and psychopath I've ever seen in cinema history. I think it has some of the sequences are just incredibly iconic. Shelley Duvall, in my eyes, it was an incredible performance. You know, whatever went on behind the scenes when it came to filming, whether we know or don't, regardless, it's a great performance, and a performance which is a realistic portrayal of terror, a realistic portrayal of abuse on the other side, and a film which I've watched the behind the scenes of this so many times, and it's just the ability that Kubrick had to create the perfect composition, the perfect use of space, the perfect colour palette. It's just incredible, and it will never fail to mesmerise me in every single way when I'm watching. And again, it goes back to the fact it's one of the films to get me into film in the first place. It's a beautiful, insanely crafted, claustrophobic horror film which takes place in a singular environment, which is something which never fails to entertain and provide suspense, but also never fails to shock and completely just put someone in awe when watching. But yeah, The Shining at number 7. Let's move on to my number 6. Number 6 is none other than Ridley Scott's Alien, the other horror to get me into the genre to begin with. And again, a film I can watch and have watched over and over again. And again, a regular theme with my top 10 is another film that got me into cinema to begin with. Truly, some of the best use of set design and the use of practical effects to create this alien, to create this isolated, claustrophobic and utterly suspenseful environment with remarkably well worked and well versed characters where you feel the stakes, where you feel what's going on. And I think this film, in my eyes, is one of the most influential all time in this kind of sci-fi horror genre, with just how it utilizes space to make the characters feel so small in this area and feel like they always have to be on guard and on watch. And I think that not only is Sigourney Weaver, one of my all-time favorite performances as Ellen Ripley, it's just a mesmerizing performance. That final sequence, I can and have watched over and over again. I've searched the shuttle sequence in Alien many a times because it's completely absurd how well it's utilized. And I think this was kind of the birth of an era. This revolutionized. This is a genre-defining film in the sci-fi horror, the science fiction horror way of using these practical effects to the best of their ability. Especially around the time when The Thing came out as well by John Carpenter, who was another film which was very close to making this list actually. I just have such a keen love for it, and it doesn't matter what special effects come out; they'll never be. It's going to be very, very hard to adequately replicate how it felt watching Alien for the first time, and not only for the first time, every time. Alien is a film that I love. One that many love. One that everybody loves pretty much. One that stands the test of time so well in the use of practical effects and actually gets better over time because you see it there. And just one, again, I can watch over and over again. We are going to move into my top 5. In at my 5th place, we have another film which features a Jack Nicholson leading role, and that is, of course, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Milos Forman's his masterpiece in my eyes. Another film that got me into the genre and got me into film. I bet you're bored of hearing me say that, but it is true with all these. Another film that I watched at a very early age and I've watched countless times. An infectious film with lovable, likeable characters, one of the most venomous and despicable antagonists ever in Nurse Ratched. Infectious personalities on show and infectious performance specifically from Jack Nicholson, and a film about the confines of society, institutionalization, how we treat people, reading a book by its cover, and all good things, which is a tremendous adaptation with a bittersweet ending. You know, the ending is something which is the epitome of bittersweet, really. You don't kind of know how to feel about it, especially on your first watch. And I think a film that does it so well in terms of the fact that it's portraying the people shown in a sincere and honest way, and a way where you can kind of really look at yourself and look at how you treat others, and especially how people were treated during that time and during that time period, people of difference, and how what the confines of society and institutionalization can, you know, what impact they can have on not only a person's psyche, but a person's mental well-being and a person's health as well. A tremendous film, a masterpiece in my eyes, a beautiful film, something I can watch over and over again. One of my another one of Jack Nicholson's performances that is one of my favourite of all time, and it is just a tremendous watch, which is truly stands the test of time, and is again a revolutionary piece of cinema in my eyes. Let's move on to my number 4. In at number 4, we have the disgusting, despicable, depraved Park Chan-wook thriller Oldboy. Park Chan-wook, if you haven't seen my content before, is a filmmaker I regard as one of the best current working filmmakers today, if not the best. A filmmaker which just does everything so perfectly, and every project is clearly come from passion and enjoyment, and Oldboy is unlike no other. Please, if you're going to watch it, do not watch the Spike Lee remake, because I love Spike Lee as a director, but that is terrible, and it takes away everything good from the original film. But Oldboy is it's a perfect, brutal, revenge-themed thriller. You get exactly what you want. You get fantastic action sequences and martial arts sequences. You get a beautiful colour palette, seamless editing. You know, the transitions in this film are just utterly delightful. 2 incredible performances from the main leads, and also, like we spoke about with Nurse Ratched, a despicable antagonist who knows just how to get in your head, and one which is, you know, brutal. You know, I'm not going to go into the actual spoiler itself, but if you've seen the plot twist, you'll know how deprived it is. And again, a film that looks at the isolation. You know, we've got a guy who's been captured for so many years, put back out into society to revenge his capturing, and we see the following period of time pan out and how everything works. And I think the ending is just truly mind-blowing. The first time I ever watched it, I was in complete awe, but not only awe, in complete and utter disgust as well, which I'm sure most of you were watching this for the first time. But I think on a technical level, on a narrative storytelling level, it's utterly perfect. Something which, another one similar to films like No Control, Men and Memories of Murder, especially Memories of Murder, is I really started getting into Korean cinema when I was younger, and I did have this internal Western bias when it came to film, you know, no subtitle films, all that stuff, when I was 16, 17, and this is one of the films, Oldboy, Memories of Murder, Pan's Labyrinth, for example, that kind of took me out of that realm and kind of introduced me to new cinema. I'm so glad they did, and I'm so glad it happened to me at a young age rather than happened to me in my mid-20s, for example, like some people. But another one of my mum's recommendations, which was a bit of a weird one from her, and one that she thoroughly loves as well, and one which I can just watch over and over again, because not only is it a technical marvel, and it has this technical prowess, which it just shouldn't do. Some of these shots are absurdly good, but it has a convincing and despicable leading performance, a disgusting plot twist, and a depraved state of humanity with some brutal action sequences as well. Let's move in to my top 3. In at third place, we have Shaun of the Dead. We have Edgar Wright's Shaun of the Dead. When people ask me what film, you know, they'll say, Seth, what film have you watched the most times? What have you rewatched the most times? I will always say 2 films. I will say Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. Hot Fuzz does miss out on this list, unluckily so. It would be in my like top 15, but I wanted to put some other things in there. But Shaun of the Dead is a perfect comedy. It's witty, it's layered, it's hilarious, it's absurdly and abrasively edited in a way, similar to Hot Fuzz, but it works in such a way that it has this timing, you know, this comedic timing, the use of soundtracks, and also, more than that, it packs an emotional punch of friendships and relationships, and how alienating partners and can go in an opposite way, but I just love it. I think Shaun of the Dead, I'll be honest, I've probably watched Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. I probably watch Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, both of them around 3 times a year. I am now 24 years old. I think I watched Shaun of the Dead for the first time. I distinctly remember Shaun of the Dead being the first kind of horror I watched, or horror comedy, but the first horror, and I probably was about 7. So you do the maths with that one. It's just incredible in every single way. I love it so much. I love Edgar Wright. I love Simon Pegg. I love Bill Nighy. I love Nick Frost, and I love the combination of all of them. And I think it's so quotable, so memorable, something which you can watch over and over again and see. In the film, for example, there is so many cameos. You've got the Coldplay guys. You've got the old football commentator. I can't remember his name. You've got Kate Blanchett, who's obviously in Hot Fuzz in the trilogy. There is so much to enjoy, and there is so much to look at, and so much to be in awe at. In the start of the film, Nick Frost and Shaun of the Dead and Ed and Shaun literally say the whole film to you out loud and say the sequences that are going to happen, and guess what? It happens. And Edgar Wright has such a clever way of utilising this foreshadowing of what's to come in his films, and it will never tire for me. It will never get old. It will always be my old. I don't think this will ever change. It's my favourite comedy of all time, and one that I watch over and over again. And I do want to say Hot Fuzz is similar, but I just prefer Shaun of the Dead a tiny bit, probably because I watched it first. But let's move on to my number 2. In at second place, we have, in my eyes, my favourite director, Stanley Kubrick's best film, and that is, and I have seen all his films a few times, and that is Barry Lyndon. Truly a work of art, a painting, an on-screen painting, a film which mesmerised me on first watch. And actually, interestingly enough, this might be my least watched film on this list. I think I've watched it maybe 3 times in my life, but it's one that you only have to watch every few years to really grasp how amazing it is. The use of natural lighting and facial expression and costume design is some of the best ever. The score is beautiful, and watching this man's life pan out from Redmond Barry, this down from nothing man, scamming his way all the way up to the noble Barry Lyndon, who is top of the social class, top of the social ladder, and it's watching them go from one end to the other and seeing what people have to go through. And I think what is most impressive about a film like Barry Lyndon, and a lot of people have said this as well, I don't tend to bore easily when it comes to slower paced films, but there is certain films where they are period dramas, historic dramas set during a certain time, maybe a faux biographical picture or maybe a real biographical picture that tend to bore after a while because they do get to a certain point of extent. Barry Lyndon does that in no time. You are watching this man's life pan out in this 3-hour period, and it is of utmost enjoyment, not only because of the witty, humorous dialogue, and oftentimes little dialogue with this emotion portrayed by facial expression and these hilarious background, and you are having the opportunity to watch these painting like shots. These Kubrick is famous for using natural lighting in this film, and the kind of the flutes on the score behind, with the incredible sets of costume design and natural lighting and these huge buildings and this use of these big sets, which is something I think often films miss in modern cinema. And I'll not say that people can't use special effects, whatever, but it's just to say that I think we miss big historical epics which are all done on a set and which are done with passion and enjoyment, and seeing the outcome of this man's life will never tire to me. And seeing the outcome of what his choices lead to, how his choices lead on to other people, what his actions and his selfish actions or his selfless actions and how they lead. And there is so many hilarious sequences. The several fight sequences are brilliant. The duel sequence is brilliant. And again, it's a film I can watch over and over again, a film that was passed down to me, and a film that I will always love. And we're going to move on to my number 1. I am cheating. I am. But my favourite films, it's not my 1, it's my 3, because they are it's one film, let's be realistic, is the Lord of the Rings trilogy. They have been my need at my lowest of lows and been my want at my highest of highs. They are, in other words, everything to me, for lack of a better term. They it's a world in which I infatuated myself with at the very young age of probably 4 when Return of the King came out, or 5 when Return of the King came out, and something I have religiously watched with my family, with my girlfriend, every single year, and something which we all love, something which I used to play when I was a kid, and a world in which there is no way to describe how much the franchise means to me, on an emotional level and on an enjoyment level, and something which I actively look forward to rewatching. We can speak about the technical prowess of this. We can speak about how ahead of its time it was. We can speak about how well Peter Jackson did with the abundance of material, unlike The Hobbit, which was, a 400-page book spread into 3 films. This is something where they actually needed to condense it, and the way they condensed it, the sets, the use of special effects within the early 2000s, the performances, the characters and how they are portrayed, the CGI, especially when you look at Gollum, for example, the Battle of Helm's Deep, the Battle of Minas Tirith, Howard Shore's one of the best scores of all time, and I will hear no argument about that. You've got Concerning Hobbits, you've got the Isengard theme, you've got Anduril, you've got the Riders of Rohan, you've got some of my favourite sequences in cinema history, scenes I can't even watch without crying my eyes out at, and I will have no shame in saying that, because they are just not only, in my eyes, perfect from a technical level, and the best fantasy, the best trilogy ever, the perfect fantasy adaptation, and the perfect fantasy set of films for any fantasy lover such as myself, and a world you can just escape to, and a world that I've always loved, I always will. I'm not going to go into this too much. I feel like I could speak about Lord of the Rings for hours on end, because they mean that much for me. From a technical standpoint, they are perfect. From an emotional standpoint, they are right there. They've been there at my lowest of lows. They've been there at my highest highs. They will be always something I reach to, and they will always be something I love. And I don't think when I watched 100 films, these were my favourite. When I've watched over 2,000 films now, they're my favourite. And when in the future I've watched 5,000 films, they will always be my favourite for how they saved my childhood, for how much they mean to me now. They are my favourite films of all time. And as I said before, hopefully everyone has enjoyed this video. If you want to, and you have enjoyed me talking nonsense at you for probably half an hour now, feel free to drop a like, drop a sub. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Let me know what you want to do next, and I will speak to you all soon.